I never imagined I'd end up in a battle with someone like Eleanor Graves, the iron-willed president of our homeowners association, though from here on, I'll just call it the HOA. When I moved into Crescent Ridge 3 years ago, the neighborhood felt like a slice of suburban heaven. Perfect lawns, uniform mailboxes, warm smiles from neighbors. It had that postcard-perfect calm people dream about. But just beneath that surface was a layer of rigid control held firmly by Eleanor. And I would learn slowly, then all at once, how dangerous it was to challenge her sense of authority. My first real interaction with her happened a few weeks after I'd settled in. I planted some lavender petunias along the walkway to my front door. A small personal touch, I thought. But apparently, the approved color was crimson. She left a notice taped to my door, citing color scheme inconsistencies with HOA landscaping policy. I remember thinking, all right, not worth the hassle, and swapped them out. I had no idea that by yielding once, I'd opened the door for Eleanor to keep walking through my life uninvited. Fast forward to this past summer, a hottest on record for our region. I work as a software engineer from home, so staying cool and focused during the day is essential for both my productivity and sanity. But more importantly, my father had recently moved in with me after undergoing triple bypass surgery. His recovery was going well, but his cardiologist had been crystal clear. He needed a stable, cool environment. Exposure to extreme heat could literally threaten his life. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was halfway through a team meeting when I started noticing something off. My home office was growing warmer by the minute. At first, I brushed it off, but then I felt a thin sheen of sweat building on my neck. I glanced over at the thermostat and saw the display was dark. I excused myself from the call, walked down the hall to the utility room, and confirmed the HVAC system was no longer running. Confused, I stepped outside and walked around to the side of the house where the unit sat, humming dutifully until now. And that's where I saw her, Eleanor Graves. She was standing next to the unit, her arms crossed, a silver padlock dangling in one hand. "What are you doing?" I asked, keeping my tone steady even though I could feel my jaw tightening. She turned with a smug calmness, not even a flicker of guilt on her face. "This air conditioning unit is out of compliance," she said flatly. Section 14, paragraph 3B. All exterior fixtures must be board approved. Yours is not. My mouth opened slightly in disbelief. This is the same unit I've had since I moved in. I just had it serviced last week. That's it. Well, she replied, clicking the padlock shut on the electrical box with finality. Your technician modified it. Visually, it's now different. Any external change requires a fresh review. I took a breath, trying to tamp down the rising panic in my chest. My father is inside. He has a heart condition. We can't go without air conditioning in this heat. She rolled her eyes, like she'd heard all before. Everyone has an excuse. You can file an emergency variance request. The board might review it by Friday. With that, she handed me a violation notice and walked away like she was strutting down a runway. I stood there, stunned, the sun blazing overhead, the hum of cicadas rising as the temperature soared. The first call I made was to the HOA's management company. I explained the situation, emphasizing my father's medical needs, but they were sympathetic in that distant, powerless sort of way. Only the board president can authorize reinstatement outside of a meeting, they said. Sorry, we recommend you find alternative accommodations until then. That was rich. Inside, the house had climbed to 82 degrees and was rising. My father, ever the stoic, insisted he was fine, but his face was flushed and I could see his breathing growing shallow. I set up fans, brought him cool compresses, even gave him ice water. But the outside temperature was nearing 100. It was like trying to hold back a flood with a broom. That evening, I called my neighbor, Dennis. He's a retired electrician and the kind of guy who can spot a fire hazard with one glance. Dennis came over, looked at the unit, then at the padlock. "This is insane," he muttered. "And illegal, I bet. Can we remove it?" I asked, almost pleading. He scratched the back of his neck. "Legally? No. But I'll tell you, Thiz, it's not an approved lock, and she has no business placing it on your private utility. She didn't give you written notice. That's trespassing, if not worse." That was all I needed to hear. I spent the rest of that night reading through the HOA bylaws and our state's property statutes. By sunrise, I had a battle plan. First, I documented everything at indoor temperature, my father's condition, the padlock unit. I took high-resolution photos from every angle and created a digital log. Then I contacted my father's cardiologist and obtained a letter on official letterhead, explicitly stating that sustained high temperatures could pose a severe risk to his health. I also called a friend of mine, Emily, a property attorney, and ran the entire situation by her. Emily didn't even hesitate. "This crosses into harassment," she said. "Depending on how the police see it, it could even be considered elder endangerment." She had no right to tamper with essential services. By noon, my father was showing clear signs of heat exhaustion. His speech was slow, and his skin was hot to the touch. I called 911. Paramedics arrived within minutes. They began treating him on-site with oxygen and fluids. One of them turned to me and asked, "Why is the house this hot?" I pointed to the padlock unit. They stared for a moment, then looked back at each other. "Sir," one of them said cautiously, "this may qualify as elder abuse. Do you want us to involve the police?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Please." Officers arrived shortly after. I walked them through everything, showed them the photos, the notice, the doctor's letter. They nodded, took their own photos, and asked me where Eleanor lived. Oh, I knew. Her house was a landmark in our neighborhood, with its sculpted hedges and pristine brickwork. She made sure everyone knew where she lived. From my driveway, I watched the two officers approach her house and knock. She answered the door wearing her HOA-branded polo, looking thoroughly annoyed until she saw the uniforms. I couldn't hear the exchange, but I could see the gestures, the rising volume, and eventually the shift in her expression from annoyance to something like disbelief. Meanwhile, a city building inspector arrived at my property. He had heard about the tampering incident and came to investigate. After checking the system and the lock, he frowned. "This unit is compliant with city code. And that padlock? That's an unauthorized obstruction of an essential utility. I'm citing the HOA for code violation." It was finally beginning to turn. The officers came back across the street this time with Eleanor. She wasn't in cuffs, but she wasn't smug anymore, either. One officer turned to me. "Sir, we've determined this padlock must be removed immediately. Given your father's condition, this can't wait. MS. Graves has declined to provide the key, insisting it's HOA property. May we proceed with removal?" "You have my full permission," I said. Bolt cutters sliced through the lock in seconds. Eleanor tried to interject, "That's property damage. You're violating HOA protocol." But the officer calmly said, "Ma'am, please stop. You had no authority to do this. There are medical implications here. You're facing potential charges." With Dennis's help, the unit was running again within minutes. Cool air rushed through the vents. I stood in the hallway, finally able to breathe. But it wasn't over yet. The officers approached Eleanor again. This time their tone shifted. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught fragments: reckless endangerment, elder abuse, trespassing. Then, to my shock, they placed her in handcuffs. She protested loudly, trying to spin herself as the victim of unruly residents. But the officers were done listening. As they guided her to the cruiser, she turned and shouted, "This isn't over. The board will hear about this." Oh, they did. The next morning, I received a call from James Patel, the HOA vice president. He was practically falling over himself, apologizing. "An emergency session was held last night," he said. "Eleanor Graves has been removed from her position, unanimously." He also explained that new policies were being drafted to prevent any future abuses of power, including a medical override clause and immediate limitations on board authority regarding private utilities. 3 weeks later, Eleanor's case went before a judge. She was found guilty of reckless endangerment and trespassing, given 1 year of probation, fined $5,000, and required her to perform 200 hours of community service. An elderly care facility. I didn't attend the sentencing, but someone sent me a photo from inside the courtroom. Eleanor stood in her pastel blazer, lips drawn into a thin line, as the judge read the sentence. Her eyes darted nervously, the control she once wielded slipping through her fingers like sand. The roses in her yard wilted a few weeks later. No one had been out to water them. I went back to my own garden and planted lavender petunias again. And this time they stayed.